Space doesn't scream when you tear through it. It doesn't protest or bend or give you warning signs that you've done something fundamentally wrong. Space just is, vast, empty, indifferent to the ambitions of being small enough to die in it. But slip space was different. The UNSC Infinity emerged from the fold, screaming in ways that starship hulls weren't designed to scream, her engines howling protest as reality reasserted itself around 5.7 kilometers of the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. Warning klaxons shrieked through every deck. Emergency systems activated automatically. And on the bridge, every display that should have shown familiar star charts, navigation anchors, and UNSC beacons showed absolutely nothing. Captain Thomas Lasky gripped the command chair's armrests, his knuckles white beneath regulation gloves, and watched his crew work through controlled chaos with the efficiency of people who'd survived worse than navigational failure. "Status," he ordered, his voice carrying the kind of calm that came from years of command during a war that had nearly extinguished humanity. "Slipspace drive is offline," Commander Palmer reported from Tactical, her Spartan 4 augmentations letting her process damage reports faster than unaugmented crew. Not damaged, just offline, like it doesn't recognize the space we're in. Navigation can't find any reference points, Lieutenant Dominguez added from the helm, his hands moving across controls that refused to provide answers. "Star positions don't match any known configurations. Gravitational signatures are wrong. It's like we jumped into a completely different universe," Cortana finished quietly. The AI's avatar appeared on the holotank at the center of the bridge. Blue light given form, still stable despite the rampancy that had nearly destroyed her during the Covenant War. She looked troubled in ways that artificial intelligence shouldn't be capable of expressing. "Explain," Lasky said. "The physical constants here are similar to our universe, but not identical," Cortana replied, data streams flowing around her holographic form as she processed information at speeds that would have burned out organic minds. "Slipspace physics operate differently. The quantum foam that our drives exploit to create faster-than-light travel exists here, but it's denser, more resistant. Our emergence should have been smooth. Instead, we punch through dimensional barriers that our universe doesn't have. So we're not in UNSC space," Palmer said. It wasn't a question. "We're not in our universe at all," Cortana confirmed. "And based on the energy expenditure required to get here, we don't have enough power reserves to force our way back. Not immediately. We'll need time to study the local slipspace properties, adapt our drives, build up the necessary charge." "How much time?" Lasky asked. "Weeks, maybe months." The bridge fell silent. Months. Stranded in an unknown universe with a skeleton crew of 15,000 personnel, limited supplies, and no backup. They'd survived the Covenant War, survived the created crisis, survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. Now they had to survive being lost. "All right," Lasky said, on straightening in his command chair. "We adapt. Palmer, put all Spartan teams on standby, but keep them aboard unless absolutely necessary. I want to minimize our footprint until we understand the local situation. Dominguez, run passive scans. Find me inhabited systems, communications networks, anything that tells us who lives here and whether they're friendly. Cortana, already scanning local space," the AI interrupted. "Captain, I'm picking up a vessel, small, primitive by our standards, running on chemical thrust with what looks like a fusion reactor that shouldn't be able to maintain stable reactions with that design configuration. Distance? 300,000 kilometers and closing. They're on an intercept course. Probably detected our emergence and came to investigate." Lasky studied the tactical display that showed the approaching vessel. Tiny compared to the Infinity, barely larger than a Pelican dropship. Its hull configuration suggesting it was designed for cargo transport rather than combat. No energy weapons, no missile systems, just a ship. Someone's home, flying through the black on engines that probably broke down more often than they worked. "Hail them," Lasky ordered. "Standard first contact protocols, non-threatening. We're lost, not hostile." The communications officer worked her console, broadcasting on every frequency that might carry voice transmission. For long moments, there was no response. Then, crackling through speakers designed to handle transgalactic communications with perfect clarity, and came a voice that sounded human, male, and deeply suspicious. "This is the independent transport vessel Serenity. You're blocking our flight path with what appears to be a small city that someone strapped engines to. Mind explaining what you're doing in our space?" Lasky allowed himself a slight smile. Human. Definitely human. And with an attitude that suggested these people weren't used to being intimidated by superior firepower. "Serenity, this is Captain Thomas Lasky of the UNSC Infinity. We experienced a navigational malfunction and ended up in your space unintentionally. We mean no harm to you or your vessel. We're simply trying to determine our location and find a way home." A pause, then, "UNSC, that's some kind of military designation? United Nations Space Command, we're on a peacekeeping and exploration force." It was the simplest explanation that wouldn't require hours of context about the Covenant War, the insurrection, or humanity's complicated relationship with militarization. Another pause, longer this time. Lasky imagined the crew of that small vessel staring at his ship through viewports, trying to comprehend something that shouldn't exist in their universe. "Well, Captain Lasky," the voice came back, carrying a distinct note of weariness. "I'm Malcolm Reynolds, and I fly this boat. And I gotta say, in my experience, when military vessels show up uninvited and start talking about peacekeeping, what they really mean is, we're here to take over and you're gonna cooperate or else. So forgive me if I'm a mite skeptical about your intentions." Fair point. Lasky had read enough history to know that military organizations, even well-intentioned ones, had a track record of imposing order whether local populations wanted it or not. "Captain Reynolds, I understand your concern, but we're genuinely lost. We're not here to conquer, occupy, or enforce anything. We just need information about local space, potentially supplies if they can be purchased or traded for, and time to repair our systems enough to attempt a return to our own space." "Your own space," Reynolds repeated slowly. "You're telling me you're from somewhere else entirely? Not just another system or sector, but another, what, dimension? Universe," Cortana interjected, her voice carrying through the open channel. "Our slip space drive malfunctioned during a routine jump and deposited us here. We're as surprised by this situation as you are." "That's an AI," Reynolds said, and there was something sharp in his tone now, something that sounded almost like fear. "You got an artificial intelligence running your ship." "Cortana is my shipboard AI, yes," Lasky confirmed. "She's been invaluable in—" "We're done here," Reynolds interrupted. "You keep your massive warship and your AI and your peacekeeping mission away from my ship, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Serenity out." The channel cut off. Lasky looked at Palmer, who shrugged with the kind of tactical pragmatism that Spartans were known for. "He's scared. Can't blame him. We show up out of nowhere in a ship that probably outguns his entire civilization, and we've got AI that he clearly doesn't trust. From his perspective, and we're either invaders or liars, possibly both. We need allies," Lasky said quietly, "or at least people who won't immediately assume we're hostile. Cortana, what else can you tell me about that ship?" "Its registry identifies it as a Firefly-class transport," Cortana replied, pulling up data. "Common design in what appears to be this universe's version of frontier space. The crew complement is small, maybe 6 to 10 people. They're hauling cargo, probably independent contractors operating outside any major government structure." She paused. "Captain, I'm also detecting increased communications traffic in this region. Multiple vessels changing course. Military-grade sensor arrays activating. Someone else noticed our arrival, and they're mobilizing." "The local government," Palmer guessed. "Probably. And if they're anything like UNSC command was during first contact situations, they're going to be cautious, territorial, and very interested in our technology." Lasky nodded slowly, his tactical mind already working through scenarios. They were the unknown variable here. Massively powerful, but also vulnerable in ways that raw firepower couldn't compensate for. If the local government decided the Infinity was a threat, they could make life very difficult through economic isolation, propaganda, or coordinated harassment that wouldn't trigger direct military response, but would make obtaining supplies and information nearly impossible. We need to make contact properly, he decided, not through long-range hails, but face-to-face. Show them we're human, that we're reasonable, that we're not here to impose anything. He turned to Palmer. Onar, get the Master Chief. If we're going to convince anyone we're not a threat, having our most decorated soldier handle first contact might demonstrate restraint. Palmer's expression suggested she thought that was either brilliant or insane. You want Chief to be our diplomat? I want him to be our example, Lasky corrected. He saved humanity more times than anyone can count, and he did it by being exactly what we need these people to see. A soldier who protects rather than conquers. Someone who could destroy them easily but chooses not to. That's the message we need to send. I'll brief him, Palmer said, already moving toward the exit. Alone with Cortana on the bridge, Lasky stared at the tactical display showing the Serenity as it continued its original course. Not running, but definitely maintaining distance. Do you think this will work? He asked the AI quietly. I think, Cortana replied with what might have been optimism or just calculated probability, that if anyone can convince suspicious frontier people that a massive military vessel means them no harm, it's a 7-foot Spartan in Mark 6 armor who fights like a natural disaster but chooses not to most of the time. That's not exactly reassuring. It's realistic, Cortana corrected. And in our current situation, realistic is the best we can hope for. If you want to see what happens when the most advanced military in one universe meets the most independent smugglers in another, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me which universe you think would win in a full-scale conflict, UNSC firepower or Firefly independence. The black is waiting, or may the force be with you. Aboard the Serenity, Malcolm Reynolds stood in the cockpit and watched the massive vessel that had appeared in their space like some fever dream given metal form. It hung there, angular and purposeful, and absolutely terrifying in its sheer scale. That thing could swallow us whole and not even notice, Wash observed from the pilot's seat, his hands resting on controls with the kind of casual competence that came from years of flying ships that barely held together. Also, it's following us. Slowly, politely, but definitely following. I noticed, Mal said grimly. Zoe entered the cockpit, her rifle slung across her back, not raised, but ready. She'd been his second in command since the war, and she had the same instincts he did when it came to recognizing threats. Thoughts? She asked. I think we just met someone who makes the Alliance look underfunded, Mal replied, and I don't like it. Don't like the size of that ship. Don't like the way they talk all reasonable and professional. Don't like that they got AI running their systems like it's normal instead of terrifying. They said they're lost, Wash pointed out. Could be true. Could be a lie designed to make us lower our guard while they figure out how to take over, Mal countered. Wouldn't be the first time someone showed up with advanced tech and promises of peaceful intentions right before they started dictating terms. A proximity alarm beeped. Something had detached from the massive vessel and was accelerating toward them. Small, fast, moving with precision that suggested either very good piloting or automated systems. Goramit, Mal muttered. They're sending someone over. Should I run? Wash asked, his hands already moving to engine controls. Mal considered it. They could run. The Serenity was fast when she needed to be, and Wash could fly her through situations that would kill less talented pilots. But running meant confirming suspicions, meant showing fear, meant starting a relationship with these people based on hostility. And if they really were lost, if they really just needed help, then running made the Serenity the bad guys. No, Mal decided. Let them dock, but everyone stays armed and ready. We meet them in the cargo bay, and if things go sideways, we seal bulkheads and vent the bay. Understood? Understood, Zoe confirmed. By the time Mal reached the cargo bay, the rest of his crew had assembled. Kaylee, with her usual optimistic curiosity, barely contained. Jane, with his hand resting on Vera in what he probably thought was subtle readiness. Simon looking nervous in the way that doctors did when anticipating violence. And Inara watching everything with the kind of calm assessment that came from years of reading people professionally. River was nowhere to be seen, which either meant she was hiding or she'd sensed something about their visitors that made her avoid contact. Neither possibility was comforting. The airlock cycled. Mal raised his hand, signaling everyone to hold position. The outer door opened, and through it stepped a figure that made Jane take an involuntary step backward. 7 feet tall, maybe more. Encased in armor that looked like it could stop small arms fire without even noticing. Colored in shades of green that had been scarred and scored by weapons that Mal couldn't identify. The helmet was smooth, emotionless, a golden visor that reflected their faces back at them without offering any hint of the person underneath. The figure moved carefully, precisely, like someone who was aware that every step carried the weight of training and augmentation that made them more dangerous than any normal human had a right to be. But what struck Mal most wasn't the size or the armor or the obvious lethality. It was the way the figure stopped just inside the cargo bay and waited. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present, patient. "Captain Reynolds," a voice said through the helmet's speakers. Male, calm, carrying the kind of professional tone that Mal associated with soldiers who'd seen too much combat to waste energy on posturing. "I'm Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, UNSC Naval Special Warfare Command. Captain Lasky sent me to establish formal contact and demonstrate that we pose no threat to you or your vessel." "Demonstrate," Mal repeated, his hand resting near his sidearm. "That's an interesting choice of words for someone who looks like they could tear my ship apart with their bare hands." "I could," the chief replied with what might have been brutal honesty or just tactical assessment. "But I won't. We're not here to harm civilians. We're here because our navigation systems failed and we need help understanding local space so we can leave." "Just like that? You show up, ask for directions, and head on your way?" "Yes." Mal studied the armored figure, looking for tells, for signs of deception or hidden agenda. But the chief just stood there, perfectly still, perfectly patient, like he had all the time in the world, and no interest in using force to hurry things along. "You got weapons on you?" Mal asked. "Yes." "How many?" "Enough." "That ain't exactly reassuring." "It's honest," the chief replied. "I'm a soldier, Captain. I'm trained to fight and equipped to win. But my orders are to establish peaceful contact, trade for information and supplies if possible, and leave this universe as soon as we're able. Not to conquer, not to occupy, just to go home." Kaylee stepped forward before Mal could stop her, her engineering curiosity apparently overriding her survival instincts. "That armor, it's amazing. I ain't never seen technology like that. How's it powered? What kind of materials you using? Is that reactive plating or—" "Kaylee," Mal said warningly. But the chief had already shifted his attention to her, and there was something almost gentle in the way he responded. "The armor is powered by a fusion reactor. The materials are classified, but they're designed to withstand plasma weapons and kinetic strikes. And yes, there are reactive elements that redistribute impact force. You're an engineer. Best one you'll ever meet," Kaylee said with pride. "Keep this boat flying when she's got no right to be in the air. Then you understand the value of good equipment maintained by skilled hands," the chief said. "The Infinity has engineers like you. They're the reason we survived the war." "What war?" Zoe asked, her tactical mind catching the detail. The chief was quiet for a moment. Then, the Covenant War. 27 years of conflict against an alliance of alien species that wanted to exterminate humanity for religious reasons. We won. Barely. But it cost billions of lives and left us with technology we're still learning to fully utilize. The cargo bay fell silent. Aliens, religious genocide, billions dead. The scale of it was almost incomprehensible. "You fought aliens?" Jane said, skepticism and interest warring in his voice. "For real aliens, not just people who look different?" "For real," the chief confirmed. Species that didn't share our biology, our culture, or our desire to coexist peacefully. They wanted us extinct. We made sure that didn't happen. Mal felt something shift in his assessment. This wasn't Alliance military swagger or posturing. This was someone who'd fought for survival and won through being better at violence than his enemies. Someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was and chose to be careful with that danger. "All right," Mal said slowly. "Let's say I believe you're lost. Let's say I believe you just want information and supplies. What exactly are you looking for?" "Star charts," the chief replied. "Information about local governments, trade routes, inhabited systems, anything that helps us understand this universe's political and economic structure. And supplies, food, water, basic materials that we can use to extend our operational window while we repair our slipspace drive. And in exchange, technology, medical supplies, information about our universe, whatever you consider fair trade." It was, Mal had to admit, a reasonable offer. Too reasonable, maybe. The kind of offer that made him suspicious because it didn't include threats or ultimatums or the usual power dynamics that came with massive military advantage. "I'll think about it," Mal said. "But I got one question first. That ship of yours, the Infinity. If someone attacked it, tried to board it, tried to take it over, what would you do?" The chief's response was immediate and absolute. "Defend it, with lethal force if necessary. But we'd attempt to minimize casualties and avoid collateral damage to civilian populations. We're soldiers, not murderers. We make the distinction." "Alliance says the same thing," Mal pointed out. "Right before they burn worlds and call it necessary." "Then your Alliance and I," the chief said quietly, "have very different definitions of necessary." And somehow, standing in his cargo bay facing down a supersoldier from another universe, Mal believed him. Word traveled fast in the black. Faster than ships, faster than light itself sometimes when the right people were paying attention. The Alliance had been paying attention. In a command center buried 3 levels beneath Londinium's Capitol building, intelligence analysts watched sensor data compile itself into threat assessments that made uncomfortable reading. An unknown vessel, massive, technologically advanced, appearing without warning in what the Alliance considered their space, was exactly the kind of anomaly that turned careers into cautionary tales if mishandled. Admiral Nguyen studied the holographic projection with the kind of calm that came from decades spent managing threats both foreign and domestic. The vessel designated Infinity hung in the display like a monument to engineering principles the Alliance's best scientists couldn't quite explain. "Energy output alone suggests weapons capacity beyond anything in our fleet," his chief analyst reported, her voice professionally neutral despite the implications. "Hull composition is unknown. Propulsion systems don't match any registered design. And Captain, they've made contact with a civilian vessel, the Serenity, registered as independent transport operating in the Outer Rim." "Malcolm Reynolds," Nguyen said quietly, recognizing the name from a dozen different reports over the years. "Former independent soldier, smuggler, generally problematic but not actively rebellious. What's his involvement?" "Unknown. They met approximately 3 hours ago. No hostile action reported." The Infinity deployed what appears to be a single-occupant craft for face-to-face contact. Since then, both vessels have maintained position. Nguyen made a decision that would echo across systems in ways he couldn't yet predict. "Deploy reconnaissance fleet to the Outer Rim. Observation only. I want to know what this vessel wants, where it came from, and whether it represents a threat to Alliance security. But no aggressive action without my direct authorization. If they're as advanced as our scans suggest, starting a fight could end very badly. And if they're here to establish a foothold, to ally with independent sympathizers, then we'll deal with it," Nguyen replied. "But carefully. We didn't survive the unification war by being reckless. We survived by being smarter than our enemies. Let's make sure that trend continues." Orders went out across encrypted channels. Ships repositioned, sensors focused. The Alliance war machine, designed to maintain control across dozens of systems, turned its attention toward a single, unknown variable. and hoped it had made the right choice. Aboard the Infinity, Cortana detected the shift in local fleet movements within minutes. "Captain," she said, her avatar appearing on Lasky's personal display, "we have company. Multiple vessels repositioning throughout this sector. Military-grade sensor arrays activating. Someone's building a perimeter around our location." Lasky studied the tactical overlay, recognizing the pattern immediately. This wasn't an attack formation. It was containment. Professional, cautious, designed to observe rather than engage. "The local government," he said. "They've decided we're interesting enough to monitor closely." "More than monitor," Cortana corrected. "I'm detecting attempts to penetrate our communication networks, very sophisticated for their technology base. They're trying to intercept transmissions between us and the Serenity, probably hoping to understand our intentions. Can they succeed? Not a chance. Our encryption protocols are built for quantum-level security. They're using what amounts to advanced radio technology. But the attempt itself tells us something important. They're scared. Scared enough to risk detection by running active intelligence operations against a vessel they know nothing about." Lasky nodded slowly. Fear made people dangerous. Made them unpredictable. The Alliance, whatever that organization was, had just demonstrated that they viewed the Infinity as a potential threat worth containing. "Palmer," Lasky said into his comm, "what's Chief's status?" "Still aboard the Serenity," the Spartan 4 commander replied. "Captain Reynolds hasn't shot him yet, which I'm considering a diplomatic victory. They're negotiating terms for information exchange." "Good. Keep him there for now. If the local government is watching us, I want them to see restraint. One soldier conducting peaceful negotiations beats a fleet positioning for possible conflict any day." "Understood." Palmer out. Alone with Cortana again, Lasky allowed himself a moment of honest concern. "How long before we can attempt a return jump?" "Weeks at minimum," Cortana replied. "The slipspace physics here are fundamentally different from our universe. I need time to study the dimensional structure, adapt our drives, build mathematical models that account for the increased resistance. Forcing a jump now would either fail completely or tear the ship apart trying. So we're stuck. We're delayed," Cortana corrected with what might have been optimism. "There's a difference. We will get home, Captain. It's just going to take patience and careful diplomacy with people who have every reason to distrust us." Before Lasky could respond, proximity alarms shrieked across the bridge. Emergency signals flooded communications channels, not military, but civilian. Panicked, desperate. "What is that?" Lasky demanded. Cortana's avatar flickered as she processed the incoming data. "Distress call from a settlement designated Haven. Population approximately 2,000. They're reporting an attack. Multiple hostiles. Heavy casualties. Captain, they're begging for help from anyone who can hear them." "Do we have visuals?" The main view screen shifted, showing grainy footage from Haven's defensive cameras. What Lasky saw made his blood run cold. The attackers moved like humans, bipedal, roughly the right proportions, but wrong in ways that bypassed rational analysis and went straight to primal fear. They wore no uniforms, carried weapons that looked salvaged or improvised, and moved with the kind of feral coordination that suggested pack hunters rather than organized military. And they were fast, inhumanly fast, closing distances that should have given defenders time to react, and overwhelming positions through sheer savage aggression. "What are those things?" Palmer asked, her Spartan combat instincts already analyzing tactical solutions. "Unknown," Cortana replied. "But based on their physiology and the settlement's communication patterns, I believe they're human. Or were. Something happened to them. Something that removed higher brain function and left only base aggression and predatory instincts." "Reavers," a new voice said. They turned to find Captain Reynolds' voice coming through an open channel. Apparently, the Serenity had detected the distress call too. "Reavers," Mal repeated, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen what these things could do. "They're men, used to be anyway. Something broke them, made them into what you're seeing. They don't negotiate, don't retreat. They just kill and eat and move on to the next target." "The Alliance," Lasky started, Won't respond, Mal interrupted bitterly. Haven's too far out, too little strategic value. By the time they authorize deployment, everyone there will be dead. That's how it always goes in the Rim. The Alliance protects the core. The rest of us get to die quietly. Lasky looked at the tactical display showing Haven's location, 50,000 kilometers away, well within the Infinity's range for orbital bombardment. One MAC round would end the attack instantly, vaporizing the Reavers and probably half the settlement along with them. We could glass the area, Palmer said quietly, recognizing the tactical option. Clean strike from orbit, no survivors among the hostiles. And how many civilians die in the blast? Lasky countered. How many people trying to defend their homes get killed by our help? Then what do you suggest? Lasky made a decision that would define how this universe remembered the UNSC. Deploy Fire Team Osiris, Pelican insertion, rules of engagement, protect civilians, contain hostiles, minimize collateral damage. This is a rescue operation, not a military strike. We show these people what the UNSC actually stands for. Captain, Palmer said carefully, that settlement is crawling with hostiles. Even with Spartan 4s, the numbers are against us. We could lose people. We could, Lasky agreed. But we're not going to sit in orbit and watch civilians die when we have the power to help them. That's not who we are. That's not what we survived the Covenant War to become. Palmer's smile was sharp and approving. Understood, sir. Osiris is go for deployment. The Pelican dropship cut through Haven's atmosphere like a blade, its pilot navigating by instruments that made the settlement's primitive sensor arrays look like children's toys. In the troop bay, Spartan Jameson Locke ran final weapons checks with the kind of calm efficiency that came from dozens of combat insertions. Spartans, he said to his fire team, we're going in hot to a settlement under attack by hostile forces designated Reavers. Local intelligence suggests they're human but operating on base predatory instincts. They're fast, aggressive, and will not retreat. Our mission is civilian protection and hostile containment. We do not, repeat, not, have authorization for indiscriminate lethal force. Precision targeting only. Protect the innocents. Understood. Understood. Buck, Tanaka. And Vale responded in unison. The Pelican's rear ramp dropped, and they fast roped down into chaos. Haven's main settlement was a collection of prefabricated structures and converted cargo containers that had been turned into homes through sheer determination and frontier ingenuity. Now those homes were burning, their residents fighting a losing battle against attackers that moved like nightmares given flesh. Locke's HUD identified targets instantly. Thermal signatures running hot with adrenaline and violence, moving in patterns that suggested pack coordination. 20 hostiles, 30. More emerging from the settlement's edges. Engage, Locke ordered. The Spartans moved like a choreographed dance of violence and protection. Buck laid down suppressing fire that drove Reavers away from a family huddled behind an overturned transport. The Tanaka's SAW created a wall of lead that channeled hostiles into kill zones where they could be eliminated without endangering civilians. Vale's DMR picked off targets with surgical precision, each shot calculated to end threats without overpenetration that might hit bystanders. And Locke moved through the center of it all, his armor absorbing hits that would have killed unaugmented humans, his rifle barking controlled bursts that dropped Reavers mid-charge. He didn't hunt them. He redirected them, forcing their attention away from civilians, breaking their pack coordination, turning their savage aggression against the one target that could survive it. A Reaver charged him from the left, moving with speed that defied human physiology. Locke pivoted, caught the attack with his armored forearm, and used the creature's own momentum to drive it into the ground hard enough to crack pavement. He put 2 rounds into its head and moved on before it stopped twitching. Contact left, Vale called out. Civilian pinned in the medical center. Locke was already moving, his enhanced reflexes carrying him across the settlement in bounds that covered ground faster than any normal human could sprint. He crashed through the medical center's door to find a woman, young, terrified, clutching a child. backed into a corner while 3 reavers closed in with the patient stalking of predators who knew their prey couldn't escape. They turned toward him, recognized a threat, and charged anyway because fear wasn't something they understood anymore. Locke's rifle came up. 3 shots, 3 targets. All headshots because anything less might not stop them and might overpenetrate into the civilians behind them. The reavers dropped, their bodies hitting the floor with wet impacts that would haunt the woman's nightmares for years. "You're safe," Locke said, his voice modulated through the helmet to sound calm despite the combat still raging outside. "Stay here. We'll clear the settlement and come back for you." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and rejoined the fight. The battle lasted 11 minutes. By the time the last reaver fell, Haven's settlement was scarred but standing. 43 hostiles eliminated. 0 civilian casualties caused by Spartan action. 3 colonists injured but alive because Tanaka had dragged them to cover while under fire. Locke stood in the settlement's center, some surrounded by colonists who stared at him and his fire team with expressions that mixed terror and gratitude in equal measure. They'd never seen anything like Spartans before. Warriors who moved like demons but fought like angels, who possessed the power to destroy everything but used it only to protect. An older man stepped forward, his hands shaking but his voice steady. Who are you people?" "UNSC Naval Special Warfare," Locke replied. "We detected your distress call and responded. The immediate threat has been neutralized. We'll maintain position until we're certain no additional hostiles are in the area." "The Alliance wasn't here," Locke interrupted gently. "We were, and we don't abandon civilians to die when we can help them." The man looked at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "Thank you for being here, for giving a damn about people on the rim." "It's what we do," Locke said simply. Aboard the Serenity, Malcolm Reynolds watched the combat footage that Cortana had transmitted with Captain Lasky's permission. Watched super soldiers in advanced armor move through a reaver attack like it was a training exercise. Watched them prioritize civilian safety over efficient killing. Watched them win a fight that should have resulted in total colony loss with 0 innocent casualties. Kaylee stood beside him, her eyes wide. They could have just bombed the whole settlement from space, would have been easier, safer for them. But they didn't. They went down there and fought hand to hand to save people they didn't even know. "Yeah," Mal said quietly. "They did." Zoe's expression was troubled. "That kind of power, use that carefully. Aye, that's dangerous, Mal. Not because they'll abuse it, but because it makes the Alliance look weak by comparison. Ineffective. And the Alliance doesn't like looking weak." She was right. Mal knew she was right. The Alliance maintained control through the perception of inevitability, that they were the only force capable of maintaining order, protecting citizens, ensuring civilization. But the UNSC had just demonstrated superior capabilities while adhering to higher ethical standards. That made them more than a military threat. It made them an ideological one. "Captain Reynolds," Lasky's voice came through the comm. "I'm transmitting coordinates for Haven Settlement. They'll need medical supplies, reconstruction materials, maybe security presence until we're certain the reaver threat is fully contained. If you're interested in assisting, we'd appreciate the help. Consider it relationship building." Mal looked at his crew, saw Kaylee's hopeful expression, Zoe's tactical assessment, Jane's uncomfortable realization that he actually respected these soldiers. Saw Simon processing what military force used ethically might actually look like. "We'll help," Mal said into the comm. "But Lasky, you just painted a target on yourselves. The Alliance don't like being shown up. They're gonna see what you did as a challenge, and they don't respond well to challenges." "I know," Lasky replied. "But we didn't come here to worry about politics. We came here to survive long enough to get home. And if surviving means helping people who need it, then that's what we'll do. Politics can sort itself out after we're gone." Mal smiled despite himself. "You're either the bravest man I've met or the most naive. Haven't decided which yet." "Maybe both," Lasky said. "Reynolds, thank you for giving us a chance, for not assuming the worst. "Don't thank me yet," Mal replied. "Story's not over, and in my experience, things always get worse before they get better." He had no idea how right he was. In the Alliance Command Center, Admiral Nguyen watched the same combat footage with very different emotions. "They deployed ground forces," his analyst said unnecessarily. 4 individuals, enhanced soldiers of some kind. They engaged approximately 40 hostiles in close combat and achieved total victory with 0 friendly casualties and minimal collateral damage. "That settlement was worthless," Nguyen said quietly. 50,000 people living on the rim, no strategic value. I know resources we need. We would have written it off as acceptable loss, but these UNSC forces, they risked their people to save colonists who mean nothing to them strategically. It's good PR, another officer suggested. Win hearts and minds, classic occupational strategy. No, Nguyen corrected. It's what they believe. You saw how they fought. That wasn't performance, that was principle. They genuinely care about protecting civilians even when it's tactically disadvantageous. So what do we do? Nguyen was quiet for a long time, watching the footage loop, watching super soldiers fight with restraint that his own forces rarely demonstrated, watching them win through being better rather than more brutal. "We prepare," he said finally, "because a military force that powerful, while operating on genuine ethical principles rather than political convenience, is more dangerous than any weapon. They make us look like what we are, an empire that maintains control through force rather than consent. And if the Outer Rim systems realize there's an alternative..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Alliance had survived the Unification War by being willing to do whatever was necessary. The UNSC had apparently survived their war by being something better, and that difference might tear this universe apart. The betrayal, when it came, arrived wrapped in technical jargon and signed by people who genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. Cortana detected it first, a subtle intrusion into the Infinity's outer communication networks, so carefully executed that it almost slipped past her monitoring protocols. Almost. But Cortana had spent years learning to recognize infiltration attempts from Covenant AIs, Forerunner constructs, and created intelligence that made human hackers look like children playing with toys. This attempt was sophisticated by local standards, impressive even, but it was still human-designed encryption running against technology built to counter threats that these people couldn't imagine. "Captain," Cortana said, her avatar appearing on Lasky's personal display with an expression that mixed professional concern with what might have been disappointment. "We have a problem. Someone just attempted to penetrate our systems using what appears to be salvaged scan data from our earlier communications with the Serenity. They were trying to inject a virus designed to create temporary system failures, not enough to destroy us, but enough to force emergency shutdowns that would make us vulnerable to boarding or negotiation under duress." Lasky felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Alliance. Almost certainly. The attack originated from a relay station in Alliance-controlled space. They're trying to level the playing field by removing our technological advantage. Cortana paused. "Captain, they failed. Our security protocols caught and quarantined the intrusion before it reached any critical systems, but the attempt itself tells us everything we need to know about their intentions. They've decided we're a threat worth containing," Lasky said quietly, "even if it means attacking us covertly." "Worse," Cortana replied. "They've decided that diplomatic engagement has failed and direct action is necessary. This wasn't an intelligence-gathering operation. This was an attempt to disable us so they could dictate terms from a position of strength." On the tactical display, new contacts appeared. Alliance warships, dozens of them, positioning themselves in a loose perimeter around the Infinity's location. Not close enough to be immediately threatening, but near enough to respond quickly if ordered. "They're forming up," Commander Palmer observed from her station, her Spartan tactical awareness already calculating firing solutions and defensive responses. "Standard containment formation. They're preparing to make demands backed by the threat of force." Lasky studied the formation with the analytical detachment of someone who'd commanded vessels in combat situations where surrender meant extinction. The Alliance fleet was impressive by local standards. Well-coordinated, properly positioned, commanded by people who understood naval warfare. Against any local threat, they would have been overwhelming. Against the Infinity, they were barely a nuisance. One Mac round could core any 3 of those vessels. The ship's point defense lasers could swat fighters out of space faster than their pilots could react. And if Lasky gave the order for a full weapons-free engagement, the entire Alliance fleet would cease to exist in under 2 minutes. But that would make them invaders. Conquerors. Everything they'd promised they weren't. "Hail them," Lasky ordered. "Standard diplomatic channels. Let's see what they want before we start making tactical decisions we can't unmake." The communications officer worked her console, and after a moment, a face appeared on the main view screen. Middle-aged, male, carrying the kind of professional calm that military officers developed when dealing with situations that could explode into violence at any moment. "This is Admiral Nguyen of the Alliance Naval Forces," the man said, his tone carefully neutral. "Captain Lasky, I believe we need to discuss the situation your vessel has created in our space." "Admiral," Lasky replied with equal neutrality, "I'm happy to discuss any concerns you have. But I should mention that we detected an intrusion attempt against our systems approximately 40 minutes ago. I assume you're aware of it?" A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, crossed Nguyen's face. "You caught it. Impressive. Our technical teams assured me the penetration would be undetectable." "Your technical teams," Cortana said, her avatar appearing on the transmission, "we're working with technology approximately 400 years behind our current capabilities. They never had a chance." Nguyen studied the AI with an expression that mixed fascination and concern. An artificial intelligence, fully autonomous, capable of independent thought and tactical assessment. "You understand why that's concerning to us, Captain? We've seen what happens when technology exceeds human control. Cortana has saved humanity more times than I can count," Lasky replied firmly. "She's not a threat. She's a member of my crew, and I'd appreciate if you treated her with the same respect you'd give any other officer. Even though she could potentially take control of our entire communications infrastructure, override our security protocols, turn our own technology against us." "She could," Cortana confirmed. "But I won't, because unlike your operatives, I don't believe in attacking people who haven't threatened me first." The silence that followed was heavy. Nguyen's expression shifted to something that might have been grudging respect. "Point taken," the Admiral said. "Captain Lasky, let's dispense with the diplomatic niceties. Your vessel represents the most advanced military technology we've ever encountered. You've demonstrated capabilities that make our entire fleet obsolete. You've interfered in what we consider internal security matters. The Reaver attack on Haven was ours to handle, regardless of response time. And you've made contact with known criminal elements operating in our space." "By criminal elements, you mean Captain Reynolds?" Lasky asked. "Malcolm Reynolds is a former browncoat, a smuggler, and a man who operates outside legitimate authority." "Yes, Captain, I mean him." "He's also," Lasky said carefully, "the only person who's been willing to speak with us honestly about local conditions without immediately trying to disable our systems or threaten us with military force. From my perspective, Admiral, that makes him more trustworthy than your government." Nguyen's jaw tightened. "Captain, I'm going to be direct. We need assurances. Guarantees that you won't use your technological superiority to destabilize our government. That you won't arm rebel factions with advanced weapons. That you won't decide our way of governing is unacceptable and impose your own vision of order." "We have no interest in your internal politics," Lasky replied. "We're here by accident. We want to repair our systems and return to our own universe. That's all. We're not invaders, we're not occupiers, we're just lost. And if we don't believe you? If we decide that the risk of allowing you to operate freely is too great." The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Lasky could feel his crew waiting for his response, could sense the Alliance fleet positioning for potential engagement, could almost hear the calculations running through Nguyen's mind about acceptable losses versus strategic necessity. "Then," Lasky said quietly, "you'll fire on us. We'll defend ourselves, and a lot of good people on both sides will die for absolutely no reason. Your fleet will be destroyed. My ship will survive. And we'll still be here, still trying to go home, but now with a relationship based on mutual hostility rather than mutual respect. Is that really what you want, Admiral?" Before Nguyen could respond, a new voice cut across the communication channel. Familiar, while carrying the distinctive drawl of someone who'd grown up on the Rim and never quite learned to be polite to authority. "Now hold on just a gorum minute," Malcolm Reynolds said, his transmission interrupting the standoff like a rock thrown through a window. "Before you two start shooting at each other and turning this whole sector into a debris field, maybe you'd like to hear from someone who ain't got a fleet to protect or a universe to get back to." On the view screen, Nguyen's expression shifted to something caught between annoyance and curiosity. "Reynolds, this is Alliance military business. It doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," Mal shot back. "You're about to start a war over people who saved a colony you abandoned. People who've been nothing but respectful despite having the firepower to turn your entire fleet into scrap. And I'm sitting here thinking that maybe, just maybe, you're making a mistake based on fear instead of facts." "This isn't fear," Nguyen replied coldly. "This is tactical assessment based on the fact that you tried to hack their systems and failed," Mal interrupted. "Based on the fact that they make you look bad by comparison, because they actually help people instead of just talking about it. Based on the fact that your whole control structure depends on being the biggest, baddest force around, and suddenly you ain't anymore." The channel went silent, and Lasky found himself impressed despite the circumstances. Reynolds had just accused an Alliance admiral of cowardice and political calculation in front of his entire command staff. That took either courage or suicidal stupidity, possibly both. "Captain Reynolds," Nguyen said with carefully controlled anger, "you're out of line." "Probably," Mal agreed. "But someone needs to say it. These UNSC people? They could have shown up and started dictating terms. Could have demanded tribute or alliance or whatever it is military forces usually want when they got overwhelming advantage. Instead, they asked for directions and offered fair trade. They could have bombed Haven from orbit and called it acceptable casualties. Instead, they risked their own people to save folks who mean nothing to them strategically. That's not how invaders act, Admiral. That's how decent people act when they got the power to help and choose to use it right." Lasky watched Nguyen process this, saw the Admiral's tactical mind working through implications and options. The Serenity had positioned itself between the Alliance fleet and the Infinity. Not aggressively, just there. A small, battered transport making itself an obstacle in a potential firing solution. "You're putting yourself between us," Nguyen observed. "Why?" "Because," Mal replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd made this kind of choice before and knew exactly what it might cost. "I fought a war against the Alliance once, lost, spent years running from consequences, dodging authorities, surviving on the edges. And I learned something in all that time. There's people who use power to control, and there's people who use it to protect. The UNSC? They're the second kind. And I'll be damned if I let you start a fight with them just because you're scared of losing your grip." The transmission from the Serenity cut off, leaving silence in its wake. Lasky looked at Palmer, who was watching the tactical display with professional appreciation. "That man just made himself a target," the Spartan observed. "The Alliance won't forget this." "No," Lasky agreed. "They won't, which is why we need to make sure this doesn't escalate. Cortana, can you open a private channel to Admiral Nguyen? Just him and me. No recording, no witnesses." "Done," Cortana confirmed. Nguyen's face reappeared on a smaller screen, his expression guarded. "Captain, Admiral, I'm going to tell you something that's not in any official report," Lasky said quietly. "The war we fought, the Covenant War, it lasted 27 years. We lost billions of people. Entire colonies glassed, populations exterminated, and we won but just barely. We won because people like Master Chief and the Spartans were willing to sacrifice everything to protect civilians who couldn't protect themselves. We won because we never, not once, decided that some people were expendable for strategic convenience. He paused, making sure Nguyen was listening. Really listening. You asked for assurances that we won't destabilize your government. Here's your assurance. We don't care about your government. We care about getting home. But while we're here, while we're in this universe, we're not going to stand by and watch civilians die when we can help them. That's not a threat to your authority. That's just who we are. And if you can't accept that, if you decide that makes us too dangerous to tolerate, then fire your first shot and we'll respond. But understand that when this is over, when we're gone and you're left dealing with the consequences, the people in the Rim, the people you've been abandoning, are going to remember who helped them and who pointed guns at the helpers. Nguyen was quiet for a long time. Then, you're asking me to trust you, to believe that a military force with overwhelming technological superiority will voluntarily limit itself based on principles rather than pragmatism. That's a lot to ask, Captain. It is, Lasky agreed. But Admiral, what's the alternative? We fight, you lose, and nothing changes except body counts. You try to force us out, and we resist, and the Rim sees the Alliance trying to exile people who saved Haven. You've already lost the tactical advantage. The question is whether you want to lose the moral one too. Another long silence. Lasky could almost see the calculations running through Nguyen's mind. Strategic assessments, political implications, career consequences. But underneath it all, the simple question, what kind of leader was he willing to be? Stand down your fleet, Nguyen said finally. Return to standard patrol postures. If the UNSC wants to provide humanitarian assistance to Rim settlements while they're here, I won't interfere. But Captain Lasky, the moment you start arming rebel factions or undermining Alliance authority, all agreements end. Understood? Understood, Lasky replied. And Admiral, thank you for choosing dialogue over destruction. That took courage. Or stupidity, Nguyen said with a slight smile. I haven't decided which yet. The transmission ended. On the tactical display, the Alliance fleet began repositioning, not retreating, but standing down from immediate threat status. Crisis averted. For now. Captain, Palmer said quietly, that was a hell of a gamble. Nguyen could have opened fire. He could have, Lasky agreed. But he didn't, because at the end of the day, he's a professional military officer trying to protect his civilization, same as us. We just needed to remind him that protection doesn't always mean control. Cortana's avatar appeared with an expression that might have been pride. You did good, Captain. We're still not home. Still stranded, but at least we're not at war. Yet, Lasky added. We're not at war yet. There's a difference. Aboard the Serenity, Mal stood in the cargo bay and tried to process what he'd just done. He'd put himself between the Alliance and a military force that could glass planets, had publicly called out an admiral, had bet his ship and crew on the assumption that the UNSC actually meant what they said about protecting civilians. That was either the bravest thing you've ever done, Zoe said from behind him, or the stupidest. I'm voting stupid. Noted, Mal replied. But Zoe, those soldiers, the ones who saved Haven, they didn't have to go down there, didn't have to risk themselves, but they did it anyway. And I'm tired of watching the Alliance let people die because they're not worth the effort to save. If these UNSC folks are willing to be better than that, then I'm going to support them, even if it makes me a target. We're already targets, Kaylee pointed out. Alliance has had it in for us since the war. Might as well be targets for doing something right instead of just surviving. Besides, Jane added, cleaning Vera with unnecessary focus, those Spartans are pretty gorum impressive. Wouldn't mind having them as allies instead of enemies. Mal smiled despite himself. His crew. Dysfunctional, dangerous, and apparently just as crazy as he was. All right then, we're committed. Let's make sure it was worth it. His calm chirped. Captain Lasky's voice came through, carrying genuine gratitude. Captain Reynolds, what you did, Putting yourself between us and the Alliance fleet, that wasn't necessary. But it was appreciated. Yeah, well, Mal replied. Someone had to remind them that firepower ain't the same as righteousness. Figured it might as well be the guy who's already on their bad side. Still, thank you, and Reynolds. The offer stands. If you need anything while we're here, supplies, repairs, medical assistance, you've earned our support. I'll keep that in mind, Mal said. But Lasky, you should know, the Alliance stood down, but they didn't stand down happy. They're gonna be watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. And when you do, they'll use it as justification for whatever they want to do. So don't make mistakes. Not here. Not with these people. Understood, Lasky replied. We'll be careful. The channel closed. Mal stood in his cargo bay and looked at the stars through the open airlock. Oh, thinking about soldiers from another universe who fought with honor, about governments that maintained control through fear, and about the thin line between protection and oppression. The infinity hung in the black like a promise. That power could be used carefully. That strength could serve rather than dominate. That maybe, just maybe, there were still people in the verse who remembered what military service was supposed to mean. It was a nice thought. Mal hoped it would last. The departure, when it came, happened without fanfare or ceremony. No speeches, no parades. No promises of eternal friendship or mutual defense pacts. Just a clean exit, the way professionals handled things. 3 weeks had passed since the standoff with the Alliance fleet. 3 weeks during which the Infinity had maintained position at the edge of the system, her crew working around the clock to adapt slipspace drives to physics that operated by different rules. 3 weeks during which Captain Lasky had refused every request for technological exchange, every subtle probe for military alliance, every attempt by various factions to turn the UNSC's presence into political advantage. They'd helped where they could, medical supplies delivered to RIM settlements, engineering expertise shared with colonies struggling with failing infrastructure, Spartan teams deployed twice more to deal with Reaver attacks that the Alliance responded to too slowly or not at all. But they'd maintained boundaries, kept distance, made it clear through action rather than words that they were guests, not conquerors. Now, finally, Cortana had completed her calculations. The slip-space mathematics worked. The dimensional barriers could be breached. They could go home. On the Infinity's bridge, Lasky stood at his command station and watched the final preparations with the kind of calm that came from knowing the hard part was over. His crew had performed brilliantly, maintaining discipline, avoiding political entanglements, and representing the UNSC with the kind of professionalism that honored everyone who'd worn the uniform during the Covenant War. All departments report ready, Commander Palmer announced from Tactical. Slipspace drive is charging. We're go for transition in 15 minutes. Communications? Lasky asked. Standing by, sir, ready to transmit your message to local authorities. Lasky had written and rewritten that message a dozen times, trying to find words that would explain what the Infinity's presence had meant without sounding pompous or threatening. In the end, he'd settled for simple honesty. Transmit, he ordered. Across the system, on Alliance command ships and RIM settlement broadcast stations and aboard one particular battered Firefly-class transport. The same message played. This is Captain Thomas Lasky of the UNSC Infinity. After 3 weeks in your universe, we've completed repairs and adapted our systems for the return journey to our own space. We're departing within the hour. I want to thank everyone who assisted us during our time here, particularly Captain Malcolm Reynolds and the crew of the Serenity, whose willingness to trust strangers made peaceful coexistence possible. To the Alliance and other governing authorities, we apologize for any disruption our presence caused. We were never here to challenge your sovereignty or impose our values. We were simply lost in trying to go home. If our actions, particularly our humanitarian interventions, created political complications, that was never our intention. We did what we believed was right based on our training and our principles. Nothing more, nothing less. To the people of the RIM settlements, you deserve better than abandonment. You deserve governments that prioritize your safety and well-being rather than strategic convenience. We can't give you that. It's not our place, and we're leaving anyway. But we can tell you that better is possible, that military forces can serve without oppressing, that power can protect without controlling. Don't settle for less than you deserve. The UNSC thanks you for your hospitality. We hope our paths never cross again, not because we don't respect you, but because us being here means something went catastrophically wrong with our navigation. Take care of each other. And remember that the universe is bigger and more complicated than any single government wants you to believe. Lasky out. The transmission ended. On the bridge, several crew members were smiling, not at the message itself, but at what it represented. They'd survived. They'd maintained their principles. And they were going home. "Captain," Cortana said quietly, her avatar appearing beside his command chair. "I'm detecting a transmission from the Serenity. Captain Reynolds is requesting a final communication before we depart." "Put him through," Lasky said. Mal's face appeared on a side screen, the cargo bay of his ship visible behind him. His crew had assembled. Zoe standing at his shoulder with her usual protective readiness. Kaylee looking genuinely sad to see the Infinity leave. Jane trying to appear indifferent but failing. Simon and River watching with the kind of analytical interest that doctors and psychics brought to witnessing history. "Captain Lasky," Mal said, "wanted to say goodbye proper-like. You and your people, you did good here. Helped folks who needed helping. Showed restraint when you could have just steamrolled over everyone. That matters, more than you probably realize." "We did what we were trained to do," Lasky replied. "Protect civilians, minimize casualties, represent the UNSC with honor, same as always." "Maybe, but most military forces I've met, they talk about honor right up until it becomes inconvenient. You folks actually lived it. That's rare enough to be worth acknowledging." Mal paused, something shifting in his expression. "You think you'll make it back? To your universe?" "Cortana's calculations suggest a 97% success rate," Lasky said. "Those are good odds. And the 3%? We end up somewhere else, another universe, another set of strangers to convince we're not invaders." Lasky smiled slightly. "But we've done it once. We can do it again if necessary." River stepped forward, moving past Mal with the kind of fluid grace that suggested she existed slightly outside normal causality. Her eyes fixed on the view screen with an intensity that made several bridge officers uncomfortable. "You change things," she said quietly. "Not big things, not revolution or political upheaval, but small things, colonists who survived because you cared. Soldiers who saw that restraint is strength. People who'll remember that power can be gentle. Ripples. Small ripples that will spread across this universe in ways you'll never see. That's worth celebrating, Captain. That's legacy." "Thank you, River," Lasky said, meaning it. "Take care of your brother and yourself. You're remarkable." "So are you," River replied. "All of you. Warriors who remember why you fight. That's the rarest thing in any universe." She stepped back, and Mal returned to the center of the screen. "One last thing, Captain. If you do make it home, if you end up back in your own universe, you tell your people about us, about this verse, about the fact that there's humans out here flying the black, surviving despite governments that don't care and dangers that don't quit. Maybe it won't matter. Maybe you'll never cross paths with us again. But if you do, remember that we ain't the enemy. We're just folks trying to get by." "I'll remember," Lasky promised. "And Captain Reynolds, if I can give you one piece of advice from someone who survived a war that nearly destroyed humanity, don't stop fighting for what's right just because it's hard. Don't accept oppression just because it's stable. And don't ever let anyone convince you that survival requires compromising your principles. The UNSC learned those lessons through blood and loss. You don't have to repeat our mistakes." Mal smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his usual guarded expression. "Appreciate that. We'll do our best to stay troublesome in all the right ways." "I wouldn't expect anything less. Fly safe, Captain." "You too. And Lasky, thanks for reminding us that not all military types are bastards. That actually helps, knowing that." The transmission ended. Lasky stood in silence for a moment, processing what felt like the end of something significant. They'd been in this universe for less than a month, but the connections formed, the understanding reached with people like Reynolds, felt more substantial than some alliances the UNSC had maintained for years. "Slipspace drive at full charge," the navigation officer reported. "We're ready for transition on your order, sir." Lasky took a breath, looked around his bridge at crew who'd followed him through impossible situations, and never once questioned whether the difficulty was worth it. Thought about the Spartans who'd risked themselves to save strangers. Thought about the principles that had guided the UNSC through the darkest war humanity had ever fought. "Initiate jump," he ordered. "Or take us home." The Infinity's slipspace drive activated with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. Space folded around the massive warship, dimensional barriers stretched and compressed. Physics operated according to equations that Cortana had spent 3 weeks perfecting. And the Infinity vanished. Not with explosive drama or visual spectacle, just a clean fold in space-time that sealed itself behind her like a wound healing. One moment she was there, 5.7 kilometers of the most advanced military technology either universe had ever seen. The next, she was gone, leaving only residual radiation signatures that would fade within hours. On the Serenity, Wash watched the empty space where the Infinity had been and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "They made it," he said. "They actually made it." "Course they did," Kaylee replied, but her voice carried relief. "Those folks survived a war against aliens. Jumping between universes probably wasn't even that hard for them." Mal stood in the cargo bay, staring through the open airlock at stars that suddenly seemed a little emptier. The Infinity had been a temporary presence, brief, professional, carefully limited. But for 3 weeks, the verse had contained something unprecedented. A military force that could have conquered but chose not to. That could have imposed order but respected independence. That remembered what service actually meant. Now they were gone, and the verse was back to normal. The Alliance maintaining control through fear and necessity. The Rim struggling to survive despite abandonment. The endless cycle of power and resistance playing out across systems that didn't care about anyone's principles. "You think they'll remember us?" Kaylee asked quietly. "When they get back to their universe, you think they'll tell people about Serenity and Haven and everything that happened here?" "Maybe," Mal replied. "Or maybe we'll just be a footnote in their logs. Strange universe, strange people, moved on." But River was right. They changed things, small things. Showed folks that military don't have to mean oppression. That power can be used careful-like. That's worth something, even if it fades eventually. Zoe placed a hand on his shoulder. "We should go. We got cargo to deliver, and the Alliance is going to be extra attentive to our activities after that little stunt you pulled. Best we stay moving." "Yeah," Mal agreed. "Let's fly." The Serenity turned away from the empty space, her engines igniting with their usual protest, carrying her crew toward the next job, the next crisis, the next impossible situation that would test whether they were brave or stupid. Probably both. But as they left, as the stars shifted and the black embraced them the way it always had, Mal couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. Not in the verse. The verse was still the verse. Still full of people trying to survive governments that didn't care and dangers that didn't quit. But in him. Because for 3 weeks, he'd seen what military service could look like when done right. Had worked alongside soldiers who protected without oppressing. Had witnessed power used with restraint and principle maintained despite overwhelming advantage. It gave him hope. Dangerous hope, maybe. The kind that made you believe things could be better even when all evidence suggested otherwise. But hope nonetheless. And in a universe as dark and difficult as this one, hope was worth holding on to, even if it hurt. The UNSC Infinity returned to her own universe exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes after initiating the jump, emerging from slipspace into familiar star patterns and UNSC beacon signals that confirmed they were home. Captain Lasky filed reports. Cortana compiled data. The crew processed their experience in the way that military personnel always processed strange deployments, with professional detachment that masked deeper questions about what they'd witnessed. They'd been to another universe, met humans who developed along different technological paths, encountered governments that maintained control through methods the UNSC had abandoned generations ago, and they demonstrated, through action rather than words, what military force looked like when guided by genuine principles rather than political convenience. It would be recorded, analyzed, studied by strategists and historians who would try to extract tactical lessons from an experience that defied tactical analysis. But the real lesson, the one that mattered, couldn't be quantified in after-action reports. They'd proven that power and restraint weren't contradictory, that overwhelming force could coexist with ethical limits, that soldiers could be professional without being oppressive. In the Firefly universe, life continued. The Alliance maintained control. The Rim struggled to survive. Malcolm Reynolds and his crew flew cargo routes that skirted legality, helped people when they could, and resisted oppression in the quiet ways that kept them alive. But Haven Settlement remembered. The colonists who'd been saved by Spartans who didn't have to care told stories. As word spread, not through official channels, but through the networks that connected people who lived outside government oversight. Stories about soldiers from another universe who'd fought with honor, who'd protected without demanding gratitude, who'd proven that better was possible even if you couldn't keep it. The Alliance tried to suppress those stories, labeled them propaganda, insisted they were exaggerations or fabrications designed to undermine legitimate authority. But the stories persisted, because people needed them, needed to believe that power didn't automatically corrupt, that military forces could serve without enslaving, that somewhere, in some universe, soldiers remembered why they wore the uniform. It was a small thing, a ripple, like River had said, and barely noticeable against the vast tide of political reality and economic necessity. But ripples spread, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they grew into waves. The Infinity had been in the Firefly universe for less than a month, had fought exactly 3 engagements, had made no permanent alliances and signed no treaties. But they'd left behind something more valuable than technology or military support. An example, a reminder that strength could be gentle, that discipline could serve freedom, that the most powerful weapons were often the ones you chose not to use. Master Chief never spoke about his time in that universe, didn't discuss the battles or the civilians saved or the moment when he'd stood in a cargo bay and convinced suspicious smugglers that his armor didn't make him their enemy. But he remembered. They all remembered. And when future conflicts arose, when the UNSC faced decisions about intervention and restraint, about protection and control, about the line between service and oppression, someone would reference the Firefly deployment. The time they'd been lost in another universe and demonstrated that the UNSC's principles weren't just propaganda, that they meant something, that they could survive contact with circumstances that would have justified abandoning them. It became part of their institutional memory, part of what it meant to wear UNSC uniform, part of the standard that future soldiers would be held to. We don't conquer, we protect, we don't oppress, we serve. We don't abandon civilians just because it's tactically convenient. We do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because somewhere in another universe, smugglers and colonists and people living on the Rim remembered that better was possible. And that memory, that small, persistent, defiant memory, was worth defending. Across infinite universes, through impossible circumstances, forever. Because some principles transcended dimensions. Some truths remained constant no matter which reality you occupied. And the truth that mattered most was simple. Power without principle was just tyranny with better weapons. The UNSC had learned that lesson through blood and loss during the Covenant War. Now they'd taught it to another universe. Small ripples, spreading outward, changing everything.